Thank you, Jakob. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's Friday, nice weather outside afternoon. I will try to be short and focus on a few key issues. And probably it's ISO 14067. And what is important on this slide is why I feel ISO has a specific role, because we see a very broad participation from major developing countries like China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, and others. And it's really important because many of the important supply chains run across the world, and we need something which works in all parts of the world. And there is also this support from Sweden, which helps to bring in experts from developing countries, especially from Africa. And I feel this helps to build ownership and contributes to capacity building, which is so important that it really works. And what is also a specific feature is that we have participation from consumer organizations like ANEC, that's a European organization representing consumers, and we learn communication is very much towards the consumer, and we have to listen to them and what their needs are. And there are also other organizations, standardization bodies, for instance, of the electronic industry, IEC, which have their own developments and which have a liaison with ISO, and they want to prepare standards that are in conformity with the ISO 14067. I feel that's very important, and of course also the contribution from WI, WBCSD is very much welcome, because we really make serious efforts to be as consistent as possible, the same as it past 2050. And you can, I would not say too much now because everything is still under development, all three standards are under development, but it will be much more consistent than it was in the past, and that you have seen it from the draft so far. Next is, we have a little bit of a delay of 3 months because we decided in Trieste to merge the two parts, and this gives the need for another round of committee draft. And so hopefully we will come forward with the draft international standard after the June meeting this year in Oslo, and we will have another meeting to develop the final draft in March next year in China. You can read the structure. It has not been really changed so much. What is important, perhaps we have now 4 annexes, which are all not normative but informative. The first one about the 100 years global warming potentials, a second one on the limitations of the carbon footprint concept. We heard today already that there are other environmental and other parameters that are relevant for decision making. There are limitations in the LC methodology itself. And then there is an issue with recycling, how to have a fair allocation of those emissions to the various product supply chains. And then an example of communication we heard just earlier in the nice presentation from Shabir about the needs of consumers, and there are examples. Next is the specific features. I spoke on consistency, and we will focus on terminology, and I feel we improved a lot with that respect so that we can speak with one language all around the world. We try to align the principles. ISO will offer principles for quantification as well as communication, and transparency, as already mentioned today, is a key principle and relates to both quantification and communication. And then the requirements itself, they are very much aligned, and this is hopefully very helpful for the market. And there are 5 options for communication in ISO 14067, and I feel that very much respects the wish for a tiered approach. So we have declaration, which is quite demanding, label, claim, report, and performance tracking report. The latter two options are very much similar to those addressed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard. And the other three are very much building on existing ISO ways of communication. There are general verification requirements across all of those 5 options, and they relate to the qualification of the verification team. The verification team should have, of course, knowledge of the relevant sector, the product-related environmental aspects, but also about the process and product knowledge of the product category, of the LCA methodology, and of other relevant standards in the field. And when it comes to communication, also knowledge of the communication program. And here is the overview, which shows how the requirements differ when it comes to the type of communication. And also in terms of quantification, there are differences in the requirements depending on the type of communication. And you see, for instance, the last one, declaration, it requires a more specific specification of quantification than the generic ISO 14067. You need something like a PCR, but it may be something different. It can be a standard. I should have written carbon footprint PCR. This is a level of detail that is in the standard, of course. It can be standard, it can be an industrial guideline. It needs something more specific. For the label, the verification follows, and the verification is linked to this communication issue. And I don't want to go into details here now because we have limited time, but if you have a declaration, you need a program operator, and the program operator will give you more details on verification. And I would make some note on, because ISO is not a regulator. A program operator acts like a regulator, and I feel it would be very important that those who are regulators, like the European Commission, for instance, and other private regulators, they should cooperate and try to harmonize their requirements. And there are, of course, some standards that have already been mentioned today, ISO standards, for instance, which offer a very good basis for verification, like ISO 14065. There is also ISO 14066, which addresses the qualification of verifiers, which is almost a finalized standard. And there is this already mentioned critical review from ISO 14044. Which also offers generic guidance on verification in the context of life cycle assessment. And in ISO 14024, there are also specific requirements which are less demanding in general, and with the claim, it's even a self-declaration. We can have a quick look, but I don't want to take too much time, as indicated. Declaration, most challenging, needs a program operator, already mentioned that. And there are very specific requirements already in the standard, and additional one from the program operator. And we made, yes, perhaps here, this is the requirement, independent third-party verification, which is now in the standard. I'm not sure whether this will survive, because this is already a requirement that is more appropriate for a regulator, but not for a standardization body. The standardization body should only provide the tool, but it's up to the regulator to make such judgment. And I gave you those examples here and the direct linkages, and I feel we don't need to go into details. Here are examples, perhaps they are well known to you, what is behind those expressions, those terms. There's also a claim for a recycling symbol. And to finish, I just would like to mention what standardization can do. And it can provide the benchmarks to ensure that consumers are not misled. We noted this earlier today already, that there is a big risk if we provide poor information. This might destroy the whole concept. If it is identified later on that the figures are rubbish, that it's not environmental, integrity is poor, this should be avoided, and therefore verification is so important, not to undermine the whole concept. To build trust takes years, and it is destroyed in very short time. It can be destroyed very short time. And then ISO can work to moderate trade effects. If we have globally the same standard, this is helpful for trade. It avoids to create barriers. And ISO, as I indicated already at the beginning, is a very international forum, truly international, of technical experts where trends can be discussed and scrutinized. I thank you, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. Thank you.